My cookbook collection had gotten out of hand, and I realized this when I was dusting my cookbooks. That should not be a thing. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what I'm doing to declutter and why it's taken me over a year to get to the point where I'm at now. I love cookbooks. Greek, American, healthy, whatever. If they have nice pictures, I was all in. And people knew that, so I would get them for gifts as well. However, I'm trying to think about being more mindful of the things that I own, and when I realized I was having to dust a cookbook, it really made me question how many of these that I needed. That said, I've got a few rules that I keep in mind whenever I go through anything regarding downsizing or minimizing my possessions. I do plan on living in a much smaller home down the line. So number one, an item has to store well. Coincidentally, books do that, they're flat, so that's not a problem for me. Number two, an item needs to actually get used, and preferably often. And what I found was by dusting my cookbooks that they weren't getting used all that much. I would go through spurts where I would browse through them, but ultimately I was sticking to some tried and true recipes. Even my favorite cookbooks weren't used all that often, and I would rarely cook something twice after I even tried them. And my third rule of thumb is that something should be a keepsake, and my cookbooks weren't that either. As a matter of fact, my son purchased a cookbook for me when he was like 4, and it was a dummies cookbook. It was yellow. It's probably what got his attention. It didn't even have pictures in it. Anyway, we were going through the cookbooks for whatever reason, and my son asked me about that dummies cookbook. And I reminded him that he bought it for me. He was like, "Get rid of it, Mom. It's fine." So even books that I thought had some significance to the gift giver, they didn't. So ultimately, when I looked through all of my cookbooks, I realized I didn't want to keep any of them. If I literally had to pack them up into a box and move them, I wasn't going to keep them. So that led me down the path. What exactly am I going to do with these cookbooks? So one of the first ideas that came to mind was my mom used to keep her recipes on 3x5 index cards in a little index box, and she kept it on the counter. So they were like on these, and she would just write the recipes, and she didn't add often. They had to be a good recipe to make it to the recipe box. And I agree, I don't feel like writing all of my recipes down. So that wasn't like an obvious solution for me, but I still kind of kept that one in the back of my mind. Another idea I ran across was a binder, and I could see where that would be really pretty and fun. You could add your own photos to it and just put them inside of the clear plastic sleeves to make sure that they don't get too messy in the kitchen. It sounded kind of fun, but I also knew that I wouldn't keep up with something like that. I feel like I might be overthinking this a little, but I really felt like I could let go of more of the cookbooks if I could find a solid way to store them and still have the same appeal for whenever I'm meal planning or looking for inspiration down the line. I spent money on these books. If you feel that pain, please give the video a like. And ultimately, I ended up using Plan to Eat to store these recipes. Plan to Eat is a meal planning tool essentially, but by storing recipes inside of it, you simply drag and drop the recipe onto a calendar and it automates the creation of a shopping list. I had been using Plan to Eat for over a year by the time I started thinking through my cookbooks, and I love it. Like, I would simply get a recipe loaded inside of it, I would drag and drop it into a calendar, and then it automates the creation of a shopping list. I would simply shop my refrigerator and pantry and then go to the store and ultimately save money because I know what I have on hand and had already shopped. I could even go through my pantry and refrigerator to come up with my meal plan. It's a solid solution, but what I wasn't doing was putting those new recipes from cookbooks into Plan to Eat. It was kind of a pain, and I always thought that I'd want to browse the cookbooks anyway. But Plan to Eat also has a way to import a recipe. So I went through my cookbooks, found my favorites, and I would actually do a search for them. And sometimes bloggers already had the recipe on their site. I could simply import it. Bam, it's done. But what I realized through this exercise, I was going through these recipes that I always wanted to try, but some of them didn't even make the cut. I wouldn't even hit the search bar for the recipe title. I decided it wasn't even worth the effort, which kind of tells you that it wasn't worth keeping either. And then I'd incorporate it into Plan to Eat, and then I'd try it. If the recipe stinks, I delete it. There's no guilt. I couldn't believe it. So it really has worked out really well. But since I started down this road, I'm still working on some of those cookbooks. I'm down to 4 cookbooks right now, which is fantastic. But in the last few months, we had a winter storm that knocked out power and internet for over a week. And that really showed me that I can't just live with Plan to Eat as an electronic resource. So I did start putting our tried and true family favorites into a recipe box. So I'm meshing my mom's process into this household. I don't love writing out the recipes, but if they're the family favorites, it's totally worth it. And what I found is that the kids won't use Plan to Eat. So when they want to cook a dish, they go to that recipe box, and so they are cooking the family favorites, which is a win. Looking for more tips or motivation in that living smaller space? Subscribe.